Alright, let's get into it. In this video, I'm going to talk about my favorite bounce back players for the 2020 season. And these are guys that either got injured last season and didn't have the greatest season due to that, or were just disappointments and busts. And I think these guys are going to outproduce their ADP pretty much. So the first guy I'm going to talk about is Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford is probably one of the most underappreciated quarterbacks in the entire league. And a lot of people don't know this, but he was on pace for 5,000 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. He was the QB4 through weeks 1 through 8 when he was healthy. Now, he goes into the same situation that he did last year. He has the same players. Kenny Golladay still there, Marvin Jones still there, TJ Hawkinson taking a step up. Kenny Golladay could also take a step up and become that elite wide receiver one that every quarterback wants to have. You know, it's the same offense. They're going to have to throw it a lot just like last year. But you also add in a guy like DeAndre Swift, a dynamic pass-catching running back, with Kerryon Johnson still there. I absolutely love this guy's ADP. Like I said, he was the QB4 through weeks 1 through 8 when he was healthy. And he's also had a track record of being a consistent, safe quarterback. I absolutely love Matthew Stafford this year. He's my QB8. His ADP is the QB13, and I think it's a steal. Even at QB8, you could even argue for him to be higher than this. I think if you need a spot starter and you go really late on quarterback, or not really late, but kind of late on quarterback, I think Matthew Stafford is a really good option this season because he's going to be on a pass-heavy offense. And he's talented. He's got a good supporting cast around him, so get yourself some Matthew Stafford. I think he's going to bounce back in 2020. The next guy I'm going to talk about is a guy that disappointed every single fantasy owner last season, including myself. I had super high hopes for this guy, and the name is Juju Smith-Schuster. A lot of people seem to forget, though, that Juju Smith-Schuster came into the league super early. He came into the league when he was only 20 years old. He couldn't even buy alcohol, and he broke onto the scene in his rookie year with Antonio Brown there. His second season in the league, Antonio Brown still there, finishes as the wide receiver 8 in fantasy football, being 21 years old. That's like saying one of these prospects that are coming to the league right now, like a Justin Jefferson, a Jalen Reagor, in their rookie season, they finish as the wide receiver 8, a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. That is not normal. For a guy that's 21 to 22 years old to come in and be a top 10 wide receiver in his second year in the league, being the second option on an offense, that is not normal. And a lot of people still don't realize that he is super young. He is still just getting started with his career. He's only 23 years old, and that's actually younger than Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, who's on his team right now, and he's only coming into his second season. Guys, he's the youngest. Before they added Chase Claypool onto their roster, Juju Smith-Schuster was still the youngest wide receiver on that team. He's only 23 years old, and that's actually younger than some of the prospects, crazy enough, that are coming into the league right now. He's younger than Joe Burrow and a lot of these guys that are coming into the league. So we look at his breakout age, which was 20 years old, and that's literally insane. Enough talk about how young he is and how much potential he has. But we look at the 2019 season that he had. Week 1, he had a toe sprain that banged him up. He played with 2 backup quarterbacks that should be practice squad quarterbacks. He was banged up the whole year. He had a concussion, then a knee sprain. You know, pretty much everything that could have gone bad for Juju Smith-Schuster, happened. Everything that could have possibly gone wrong. He lost his starter. You know, he was banged up a lot of the season last year. And I think this is a year that we just have to wash away. We've seen it happen before. A lot of people like to compare Juju Smith-Schuster with DeAndre Hopkins because DeAndre Hopkins, in his 3rd year in the league, he actually did have a massive fallback in production. But then he came back in his 4th year in the league and absolutely killed it. Guys, the type of production that Juju Smith-Schuster had early on in his career, that's something we have to look at. And that's something that doesn't happen. This is not a fluke. This is not a fluke player who can't be an alpha on his team. And this is not a fluke player that just isn't good. Because that type of stuff just never happens. He's going into his contract year. He's only 23 years old. He's just getting started. He's my wide receiver number 9, and I think he's going as the wide receiver 12. I think you can get him later than that because a lot of people are going to have a sour taste when looking at, Juju Smith-Schuster because he busted last season, but a lot of people just don't know what he really had to go through last year. I think he's going to bounce back. Big Ben is back, and we all know Big Ben loves to target his number 1 target, and that's going to be Juju Smith-Schuster this year. We've seen it with Antonio Brown and his previous wide receiver ones. He loves to force feed them, and Juju is more than talented to come in, be that alpha guy, and have a great season this year, produce wide receiver number 1 numbers. So get ready. I'm all on board on the Juju Smith-Schuster hype train. This is going to be a great season for him, and I expect him to fully bounce back in 2020. Another quarterback I want to talk about is Carson Wentz. Now, a lot of people seem to forget Carson Wentz was the QB9 last season, and that was with his supporting cast. Lane Johnson missed a couple games. Alshon Jeffrey was injured the whole entire season last year. Deshaun Jackson got injured for the entire year in week 1, and it was basically just a disaster. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside was completely terrible. He could not live up to expectations at all. And there was one point in the season where Greg Ward was Carson Wentz's wide receiver 1. He still produced. He still managed to somehow win this team games. Not only that, but he also managed to somehow produce fantasy football numbers. We take a look at this season, the 2020 season. Deshaun Jackson's back. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside could take that next step, that next second-year leap, because he didn't do anything last season. And he's going to have to come in, command that X-role wide receiver because Alshon Jeffrey doesn't look to be ready for week 1. We see that the Eagles do spend a first-round pick on one of the best wide receivers in a historic draft class in Jalen Reagor, who could start right away with Deshaun Jackson. So I think this is a much, much better outlook for Carson Wentz in 2020 than it was in 2019. Not only that, but the Eagles do spend a 5th and 6th round pick on wide receiver to kind of ensure that they're backed up, especially now with Marquise Goodwin opting out, Deshaun Jackson still being kind of injury prone. So this is a guy that I absolutely love this season, and especially if you go late quarterback, he plays the Washington football team week 1, and that's just going to be a feast, especially with Deshaun Jackson back. We saw him last season have an absolutely great game week 1 against the Washington football team last season. And I absolutely love Carson Wentz. He was the QB9 last season with Greg Ward as his wide receiver 1. It's only going to go up for him at this point. I absolutely love Carson Wentz, especially with his week 1 matchup. So take advantage, and I think this is a guy that's going to bounce back as long as he stays healthy on this team. Alright, I have another guy that I believe is going to bounce back, and I'm going to keep this short because there's really not enough explaining, and a lot of people just don't seem to get that Alvin Kamara is a top 4 back in fantasy football. Guys, last season, why are you guys using last season as a reference to Alvin Kamara's 2020 fantasy football outlook? He was banged up the whole year with an ankle injury, a nagging ankle injury that pretty much, he wasn't the same because of the injury. Even when he was cleared to play, he wasn't the same just because of his injury. He's coming in to one of the most explosive offenses in the league. Drew Brees is still there. He knows how good Kamara is. They both have that chemistry. And, he's going to get a lot of receptions. And I just think he's arguably the safest player in the draft besides maybe Christian McCaffrey. Because as long as he stays healthy, he's a top 10, borderline top 5 running back at the very least. Just because he's going to get touchdowns, he's going to get catches, and he's just a good player overall. I absolutely love Alvin Kamara in 2020. I think he's a top 4 running back and a top 4 pick in this year's draft. And please don't make the mistake of not drafting him just because he didn't have a good year last year. Because if, we saw it last season with Saquon, but no one's saying anything because everybody knows how good Saquon is. Now let's look at Alvin Kamara and all agree that he's a good running back. So why are we using the nagging injury that Kamara had against him, but we're not using that for Saquon? It just doesn't make sense. Draft Alvin Kamara in the top 4 in your fantasy football draft. Otherwise, you're going to regret it. The next and final guy I have on my list is James Conner. And I was really low on James Conner last season because I don't think he can stay healthy. I don't think he's really that good of a running back. But looking at his 2020 outlook, it's a contract year. If there's any year he's going to stay healthy in his entire career, it's going to be this season. I've seen his workouts. I've seen how hard he's working. If there's ever a year, it's going to be this year, which is what I'm trying to say. He's going to be a workhorse back and one of the most running back friendly offenses in the entire league. And a lot of people seem to forget that through weeks 1 through 8, when James Conner was healthy, he was the RB9 or RB1 in fantasy football. Then he suffered the AC joint late into week 8, and then he missed 5 games and he just wasn't the same. But not only that, in the 2019 season, he produced without Big Ben. He produced without this offense being as efficient as it could be. Now, I think Juju's going to bounce back. Big Ben is going to come in, be the same Big Ben, improving the offense, because anything can get better than last year. Anything will be better than last year. They had 2 practice squad type of caliber quarterbacks running their offense, and they almost made the playoffs. So you add in Big Ben, a good quarterback, and I think this offense is just going to be way better than it was last season. So that's only going to be better for James Conner. I have him as an RB1 if he stays healthy. If he stays healthy, I think he's going to be a top 12 running back. But that's if he stays healthy. The Steelers, they also drafted Anthony McFarland in the 4th round, running back out of Maryland. They still have Jalen Samuels and Benny Snell, but none of those guys are really that great. Anthony McFarland showed some flashes in Maryland. He's super explosive, but he's also a guy that's injury prone. And he's also a smaller guy that I don't think he's going to be able to get that much work early on just because he might get injured. James Conner, and the staff for, Mike Tomlin, they repeatedly said James Conner is the guy in this backfield. I think this is the last chance that James Conner has, to really be a featured running back pretty much in his career, unless something crazy happens. He knows that too. It's a contract year. He's looking to get paid, and I'm willing to bank on James Conner kind of late 3rd round, early 4th round in 12-man leagues. And if you can get him as your RB2, I think that's great value for a guy that I think could be a RB1 to finish off the year. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, throw away everything that we saw last year, because that team or that offense was completely crap. That offense was terrible. So I absolutely love James Conner this year. He's a guy that I'm targeting for my RB2 all day, because if he hits, he hits. Like, that's a great pick if he hits and he's able to stay healthy in this system. Now, that's all I have in the video, and these are guys that I am expecting to bounce back in 2020 because maybe they had disappointing 2019 years, or they just got injured last year, and I expect these guys to fully come back and outproduce their ADP. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see y'all later.